At the height of her power, Fan Bingbing did not fall. She disappeared. One day, her name dominated headlines, red carpets, and global fashion events. The next, it was as if she had never existed.
No farevel, no explanation, no gradual decline.
In an industry built on constant visibility, her sudden absence was more unsettling than any scandal. Fan Bingbing was not merely a celebrity. She was a symbol of excess, influence, and control within Cbiz. Her image extended beyond film and television into fashion, commerce, and international recognition. She represented a level of autonomy few stars ever reach, and that autonomy was precisely what made her presence feel untouchable. Until it wasn't. When the silence arrived, it arrived completely. What followed was not outrage but confusion. Media outlets stopped mentioning her. Projects erased her name. Conversations shifted away without acknowledgement. There was no public battle, no visible confrontation. The system did not argue with Fan Bingbing. It simply removed her from the frame. In doing so, it demonstrated a form of power that does not need spectacle to be effective. This opening is not about the details of a case or the morality of a mistake. It is about the mechanism that followed, about how one of the most visible figures in Chinese entertainment became invisible almost overnight. Fan Bingbing's disappearance revealed something rarely discussed openly, that in Cbiz, erasure can be more decisive than condemnation. The question this story asks is not what Fan Bingbing did, but what her vanishing tells us about the structure she once dominated. What happens when a star grows larger? Fan Bingbing's rise was not accidental, nor was it purely driven by opportunity. She began on the margins, visible but replaceable, before steadily transforming herself into a presence that could not be ignored. Early in her career, she understood something many actors learn too late. Talent alone does not create power. Control does. Over time, she learned to command attention, shape narratives, and turn visibility into leverage. Her image was meticulously constructed. On screen, she chose roles that reinforced strength, elegance, and dominance. Off-screen, she mastered the language of
Spectacle.
red carpets became her territory. Fashion was not an accessory, but a weapon. Each appearance was designed to remind the industry that Fan Bingbing was not simply participating in Cbiz. She was setting its tone. International recognition followed, reinforcing the perception that she had transcended domestic boundaries. What made her exceptional was not just fame but autonomy. Fan Bingbing did not rely entirely on studios or agencies to define her value. She built her own commercial ecosystem, blending acting, endorsements, and global branding into a singular force. In doing so, she blurred the line between star and institution. She was no longer only managed by the system. She operated alongside it. This level of independence came with admiration and unease. To audiences, she represented aspiration without apology. To the industry, she represented a concentration of influence that was difficult to regulate. The more powerful her symbol became, the less interchangeable she was, and the less predictable her position within the system appeared. By the time she reached her peak, Fan Bingbing was more than a leading actress. She had become a benchmark for visibility and control, a reminder of how far a star could rise within Cbiz. But symbols, once they grow too large, carry risks of their own. And the system that elevates them also watches closely, waiting for the moment when admiration turns into something else. The turning point in Fan Bingbing's story did not unfold like a conventional scandal. There was no prolonged public trial in the media, no dramatic sequence of accusations and rebuttals. Instead, a single issue surfaced and quickly became something much larger than its technical details. The question was no longer about compliance or error. It was about boundaries. What Fan Bingbing represented at that moment mattered more than what she had done. She was not just another actress under scrutiny. She was the most visible embodiment of unchecked influence in Cbiz. Her commercial reach, international exposure, and symbolic dominance placed her in a category where mistakes were interpreted as challenges to order rather than individual failures. When scrutiny arrived, it was swift and absolute. The response revealed the nature of the system itself. Media coverage did not escalate. It disappeared. Her name was removed from platforms. Credits were altered, and previously omnipresent imagery vanished from circulation. There was no debate to follow because debate was not permitted. The absence of discussion was the message. This was the moment the line became visible. Fan Bingbing had crossed into a space where visibility exceeded tolerance. Whether intentional or not, her position had grown too autonomous to be absorbed quietly. The system did not seek to correct her image. It sought to neutralize it. And it did so without spectacle, demonstrating that control in Cbiz is most effective when it operates silently. In that silence, the industry delivered a clear signal. Stardom does not grant immunity. Influence does not equal protection. And no matter how large a symbol becomes, it remains conditional. Fan Bingbing's fall was not marked by collapse, but by removal, and that distinction would define everything that followed. What followed Fan Bingbing's disappearance was not chaos, but compliance. The industry adjusted with unsettling speed. Media outlets avoided her name. Brands severed associations without public statements. Colleagues offered no defense, not out of cruelty, but out of instinct. In Cbiz, survival often depends on knowing when not to speak. This silence was not passive. It was structured. It functioned as a form of punishment more effective than public condemnation. By removing Fan Bingbing from the conversation entirely, the system ensured there was no space for sympathy, debate, or reinterpretation. Without visibility, a star cannot mobilize public support. Without acknowledgement, even outrage fades quickly. For Fan Bingbing herself, silence became mandatory. There was no opportunity to explain, to negotiate her narrative, or to reclaim control over her image. The absence of voice was the consequence. In an industry where presence equals existence, enforced invisibility is a form of erasure. The message was unmistakable. The system does not need to argue with those it disciplines. This period exposed a fundamental truth about power within.
Cbiz.
Authority does not rely on constant enforcement. It relies on shared understanding. Everyone watching Fan Bingbing's removal understood the implication for themselves. The silence surrounding her was amplified precisely because it was collective. More than a personal downfall, this phase marked a recalibration of boundaries. Stars were reminded that autonomy has limits, and that exceeding them invites consequences that are quiet but total. Fan Bingbing's punishment was not designed to humiliate her publicly. It was designed to remove her as a point of reference. And in doing so, it reshaped the behavior of an entire industry. When Fan Bingbing finally reappeared, it was not as a return, but as a recalibration. She did not step back into the center of Cbiz, because that center was no longer available to her. Instead, she surfaced at the edges, international film festivals, fashion events abroad, carefully chosen public moments that avoided confrontation with the system that had removed her. Her presence was controlled, measured, and deliberately modest compared to the dominance she once commanded. This new phase was defined by limitation. Fan Bingbing could work, but not freely. She could appear, but not loudly. Projects were smaller, platforms narrower, and ambitions visibly restrained. The industry did not welcome her back, but it no longer actively erased her either. What remained was a narrow corridor of existence outside the main structure of Cbiz, where survival was possible without full rehabilitation. Yet even in this reduced space, her symbolic weight lingered. Each appearance was scrutinized not for performance, but for meaning. Was this a comeback, a test, or simply permission to exist? The uncertainty itself was the point. The system offered no clarity, because clarity would imply negotiation. Instead, ambiguity became the boundary. Fan Bingbing's continued presence outside the system revealed a harsh reality. In Cbiz, exclusion does not always end. In Disappearance, sometimes it ends in containment. A star may continue to live, work, and create, but without the power, reach, or influence that once defined them. This was not restoration. It was survival under new terms. Her story at this stage is no longer about dominance or rebellion. It is about endurance, about what remains when fame is stripped of its privileges and reduced to permission. Fan Bingbing still existed, but no longer as a force the system needed to acknowledge. And that distinction would ultimately define the meaning of Fan Bingbing's story does not end with redemption or collapse. It ends with exposure. Her rise and removal revealed a truth that Cbiz rarely articulates directly. The industry does not fear failure, but excess independence. Talent can be celebrated. Fame can be rewarded. But autonomy, when it grows beyond the system's ability to contain it, becomes a liability. Her disappearance demonstrated how power truly operates. The system did not need to discredit her publicly or dismantle her achievements. It only needed to withdraw recognition. By doing so, it reminded every participant that visibility is conditional and that status exists only as long as it aligns with collective boundaries. Fan Bingbing was not erased because she lacked value. She was erased because her value was no longer manageable. What makes her case enduring is not the mistake that triggered it, but the method of response. Silence replaced spectacle. Absence replaced confrontation. And that choice reshaped the behavior of an entire industry more effectively than any warning ever could. Her fall became a reference point, a quiet lesson observed by everyone who remained. In this sense, Fan Bingbing did not simply lose her place in Cbiz. She became its most powerful cautionary example. Her career illustrates that in tightly regulated systems, the greatest risk is not scandal but standing alone. The price of becoming a symbol is that once the system withdraws its consent, there is no appeal process, only distance. Fan Bingbing lived. She continues to work, to appear, to exist. But her story marks the boundary between stardom and control. And in that boundary lies the real cost of fame in Cbiz, not the loss of applause, but the loss of belonging.